Okay. Alice wants a picture of you.
The beautiful audience.
Say hi, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you. Text that one too.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Kansas City Public Library. I'm Katie Stover, the Director of Reader Services, and welcome to our beautiful Hellsberg Auditorium for an evening with Alice Randall, author of My Black Country, a journey through country music's past, present, and future. If you haven't gotten a copy yet, please order one from bookshop.org. Bookshop.org supports independent bookstores all across the nation with every purchase. And Alice will be happy to sign our 150th KCPL anniversary book plates for you after the program. So readers might recognize Alice Randall from her first New York Times best-selling novel, The Wind Done Gone, an alternative account of Gone with the Wind. Think Prissy slaps Scarlet back.
The literary equivalent.
Or Black Bottom Saints, her latest novel. Alice paid a virtual visit to Kansas City Public Library during the quarantine, and she brought along an online museum and cocktail recipes as a demonstration for that book's launch. It was amazing. One of the best book launches I've ever seen. And perhaps you've heard Alice on the airwaves. She's an accomplished country music songwriter. Steve Earle, Glenn Campbell, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, and Trisha Yearwood have recorded Alice's songs. If you sang along in the car to X's and O's with Trisha, you were singing with Alice too. And if your phone isn't using X's and O's for a ringtone this evening, now would be a good time to put it on silent. Her students at Vanderbilt University pack Alice's classes in country lyrics, Black Detroit, soul food, and Southern food, and the Federalist Papers. I really wish I'd gone to Vanderbilt now. I need to stop right there because we need to get to the rest of the evening. But please welcome Alice Randall to talk about My Black Country.
I am so thrilled to be in Kansas City. I picked the places I would go, and I am excited. I hope you'll find out why I wanted to be in Kansas City. And part of it is because Katie is so amazing, and this library is amazing.
Thank you, Alice. I've been looking forward to this day since October 2020. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be sitting next to you. I want to get started talking about this beautiful blend of cultural history and memoir because I was fascinated by your use of family in this book. So let's dip into country music of your childhood family. So tell us about the songs that were introduced to you by Dear, your grandmother, and Betty, your mother, Mary Frances, your beloved aunt.
I was born in Detroit City in Motown in 1959 in the same year as Motown Records. And I said that my mother, my grandmother, and my aunt only had one thing in common. Now that should have been that they loved me, but my mama did not love me, so it wasn't that. And it also wasn't gardening or the Pistons or any of the other things people commonly loved in Detroit. It was country music. My grandmother, who was born in 1898 near Selma, Alabama, loved country sung in the air. She loved the classic songs, and those would be Will the Circle Be Unbroken? She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain. Those were the country songs she loved. My mother, who had learned to sneak listening country song, being raised in a German Lutheran Black home in a white community, she loved the honky-tonk radio songs that she would hear in the car radio, sneaking around with her friends or in her own laundry room as an adult. My aunt, a snazzy dame who was known to get into fights with Billie Holiday at clubs, she loved albums. She was really discerning. So her favorite was Ray Charles's Modern Sounds in country and Western music. She wore that record out. But that wasn't Ray Charles's first foray in the country. And the year I was born, one of the songs she was playing over and over was a song Ray Charles had a hit on that was called Just for a Thrill, that was written by Lil Hardin. And so I got to hear the record players, the albums from my Aunt Mary Frances. I got the songs in air from my grandmother dear, and I got to hear the radio hits with my mama. The best was sitting on my grandmother's dear's lap and hearing those songs just jump from her mouth to my ears.
And your home family led to you creating a music family, the first family of Black country music. That's who we're looking at right here. Tell us about your music family.
Well, I'd love to tell you, I'm going to tell you about my music family, but can I tell you one last thing about my family?
Please, please.
Because you'll understand the music family a little bit more if I tell you. Like I have a father, and my father was a great father, but he was a very imperfect country music father. And so when about the time I was about 3 years old in Detroit, or 4, I was sitting with my father, and he was about to leave me in the car and jump inside a door. I didn't know what he was going to do in that door. And he said, before the clock hands get to this point, I'll be back. And he had done this before, and he was always back before the hands got there. He was very reliable. But this darkness was falling. It was getting colder. I didn't want to be alone in the car. So I looked at these letters in the sky, and I said, Daddy, don't go in that BAR. And he said, I have parked you outside of too many bars for you to be spelling that word to me. Now, this did not mean he didn't go in the bar. He just took me with him. Sat me up in the bar stool. I have fictionalized that in Black Bottom Saints. You can read that. But it wasn't weeks, it was months later, I did with country music, I did the thing that country music does. I took something that was too hard to bear, and I turned it into something beautiful that made the hard bearable. I was sitting up in a cherry tree looking at the John C. Lodge like it was a river, the cars traveling. And I started singing, Daddy, don't go in that BAR. Please don't leave me alone in the car. Daddy, don't go in that BAR. And that song I completed, I brought that to Nashville with me in 1983. But I wrote my first country song, a Motown cherry tree. And I told you that before I introduced you to the first family because my father was an imperfect man. It's something like what people say about the wonderful Huckleberry Finn. He had none of the virtues but those which were most important, and all of the vices except for those that were unforgivable. That was my daddy. My mother was just the opposite. Her vices were unforgivable. Her virtues were pretty glamorous. And so I early on, to tell you a sense of why I don't like the blues and I love Black country, and get to my first family, is when I heard the blues song, sometimes I feel like a motherless child a long, long way from home. I couldn't understand why the singer sounded so sad. That sounded like the safest thing I could imagine, being a motherless child a long way from home. So I knew something, so the blues was not right for me. Black country had hope in it. And I needed a new mama, so I had an imaginary mama from early days. I had Mary Frances, I had Dear, but I had an imaginary mama, and my imaginary mama was Lil Hardin Armstrong. Because I was born in Detroit that year, 1959, and that bad but wonderful Black daddy of mine, he was the first to tell me that traditional was probably a colored gal. No, those songs say traditional in the hymn, that was probably a colored gal wrote that. And he also told me that Anna Records was founded the year before Motown Records. He was putting up in front of me all the things that Black women had done, and he put in front of me this brilliant Black woman, Lil Hardin Armstrong, who he said had written on that big, and put a lot of quotes around this word, but it was used at the time, that big Peckerwood hit, that big hillbilly hit, Blue Yodel number 9. That was actually the first, he didn't know this number, he just knew it was a big Peckerwood hit. That it was the first million-selling country single in 1930. And my daddy knew Lil Hardin Armstrong was on that record, Louis Armstrong was on that record, and Jimmie Rogers. But when that record was put out in the world, only Jimmie Rogers' name was on it. But Lil Hardin, just remember that year I was born, she was still living. Louis Armstrong was still living. They were still playing Detroit City. Do you think they didn't tell people they had played on that big hillbilly hit? Of course they told people they had done it. Everybody in Black Detroit knew it. It may not have made it into The history books, Bill C. Malone, I will call his name, wrote the big book on country music. He fought me almost to the end of the Ken Burns special, claiming that Lil Hardin wasn't on it, and I finally proved that she was. But if they had interviewed more deeply people at the time, they would have known that it was. So here we have my first family, and that is Lil Hardin Armstrong. And she played on Blue Yodel No. 9 in 1930. But who's before her? That's DeFord Bailey. DeFord Bailey with the harmonica in his hand. He was the Opry's first superstar, not black superstar. He was the Opry's first superstar. He had a hand in launching the career of Roy Acuff and others of the early foundations of the Opry family. In 1927, he started playing on WSM in 1925. In 1927, right after the first time the words Grand Ole Opry were said on air, the next sound heard was DeFord Bailey playing Pan-American Blues. In my mind, their genius child is the great Ray Charles, who was an instrumentalist like DeFord, great songwriter like Lil, coming out of jazz like Lil, and then constructing and deconstructing country in the album Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. Now, the two my other relatives up there, one is one who brought me to Kansas City, Charley Pride. We're gonna get back to that one. But right in the center is one that I bet, does anyone recognize him before I say who he is? Call out his name if you know it. Herb Jeffries, the great Herb Jeffries, also known as the Bronze Buckaroo. In the 30s and 40s, he was making all-black singing westerns. He was so famous at the time that it said that Herbie Hancock's parents named him for Herb Jeffries. I cannot document that, but I've been told that. He did these wonderful black cowboy singing cowboy movies, and it reminds us that country and western at one point was called, or country was called country and western. And we'll hopefully get more into a deep dive into that here. But I gotta go with Charley Pride. So I say that Herb Jeffries is Lil's stepson, because Lil discovered Herb Jeffries in Detroit City with Louis Armstrong, sent him up to Earl Father-Himes in Chicago, and talked to him. Remember, 1930, she is on that big country record, and a few years later, he's making country westerns, movies, but there is the great Charley Pride. When I arrived in Nashville in 1983, I met Charley Pride that year. He had already been at the top of the country charts 29 times in 1983. 71, he was Entertainer of the Year. But he loved Kansas City because he came to country music out of the Negro Leagues baseball. Negro Leagues founded in Kansas City. He loved the Negro Leagues Museum. He was very actively involved in it. You can find more images of him visiting that museum than you can find images of him playing concerts here. And Charley Pride, I think one of the essences of Charley Pride is that he stood on the stage in the 60s, not in a minstrel or entertaining tradition, but like an athlete. He had much more in common, in my mind, in the early 60s with Muhammad Ali than he had with any black entertainer. Because you can compare him to someone who I do adore, Harry Belafonte. Harry Belafonte has a very pretty boy and a very foreign stance to him. I love Harry Belafonte. But people who stood on the stage like Charley Pride, often going to be put into this sort of buck stereotype. Charley Pride took his alpha black maleness and inhabited it with his full and unquestionable humanity. He was extraordinary in his power and his beauty, just like, in my mind, Muhammad Ali. So that is the first family of black country. And essentially, in my mind, the first family of all country, because my little formula for what is country is it is Celtic, English, Irish, Scottish ballad forms narrative, plus black influences, plus evangelical Christianity. It takes all three of those things for a country song to be country. Without the evangelical Christianity, you may be in the territory of a blues song. Without the black influence, you may be in the territory of a folk song. You take all three of those things together, you've got a country song.
That's amazing. There's 4 generations of black women listening to country music in this book. There's Dear, your grandmother. There's Betty. There's you. And your daughter, Caroline. Which songs did you introduce to Caroline?
Well, Caroline was born in 1987. And so, first of all, I will just tell you that one of the first controversies in my life as a mother was when my Montessori preschool called and was very concerned with the fact that there was a week, every kid got to bring in their favorite song and share it with the class. My child brought in the Grand Tour, a song by George Jones. Over there, I was newly divorced, stands a chair where it is a wildly brilliant song. And Caroline understood that and brought it in. They were very concerned. But she had a whole repertoire of amazing country songs. She was raised in the Bluebird. I want to go back a little moment and say that the quick version of this is, I met Caroline's father. I moved to Nashville in 1983. And I got to work that first year or so afterwards, that first year or two, I got to work on a Johnny Cash video, and I was in the basement of the Ryman Auditorium putting a little nudie suit, this is a rhinestone suit, on a trained chicken. I was participating in the nadir of Johnny Cash's career. I do love Johnny Cash, and he was very supportive of me, and his granddaughter Chelsea Crowell is one of my favorite allies and people. But in this case, Roy Orbison was in the basement of the Ryman with me, because they were such great friends. Roy Orbison had helped launch Cash, and here Cash was at a hard moment. He was going to be there. And I ran out of the Ryman thinking, I've got to go out and find the kind of friends that Roy Orbison and Cash are to each other, who are going to be with you on the way up and on the way down, the people I'm creating with. And I cannot be putting a chicken in a rhinestone suit. I literally ran out of that building and sat on the sidewalk, my ass on the curb. And two people came and asked me if I was related to Johnny Rodriguez. Now you remember, say, no, I'm an American black person. So the one lady came up to me and said, you've got to meet my grandson. My godson. He says there's no interesting women. He meant black women in Nashville, Tennessee, no interesting women. And I couldn't go to this party for the 4th of July because I was supposed to be at a country music event. And somebody who is in the Opry now, he had so many racist objects in the party I did go to, including the one that caused me to run out of the house was a black person back scratcher. I tell this story in the book. And I took Ray Kennedy's hand, and Ray Kennedy produced Lucinda Williams albums, Steve Earle albums. I said, Ray, we've got to get out of here. I cannot stand it. I pointed to this one thing, and we ran out the door, and we went to and Ray is white, we went to an all-black party in North Nashville at the house of a black woman who was a professor of German who had gone to Wellesley, and I met my daughter's father, Avon N. Williams, a brilliant black lawyer. And DeFord Bailey would write his first political jingle that got him elected to the state senate in Tennessee. And that's one of the things I wanted to say that to you. The people, I got to Nashville, told the story that DeFord Bailey got too lazy to write new songs. No, he got pushed off the Opry when it started to be televised. After being its first star and being its star for 20-some years in the 40s, more television's coming so people see that he's black, not just the radio. They push him off. But DeFord didn't stop making music. He stopped making music in white spaces. He continued to make music, and he made black political music. He helped Avon Williams Jr. get elected to be the first black state senator in Tennessee. So running away, Caroline comes out of country music, running away, running to, running from. country music. She was that little girl. She is the X's and O's, that little girl who signed her letters with X's and O's and ribbons and bows. She was that little girl. She's a little girl who fell asleep at the Bluebird so many times. She's a little girl, I think Garth Brooks brought a crib up to the second story of my townhouse. She was raised in country and Western music on the side of the stage. When Glenn Campbell recorded Who's Minding the Garden on the new album, Caroline was in the studio with us because she had had an accident at her swimming pool in day camp that day before, and she felt like her little face was too messed up to go to day camp. And Glenn Campbell got down on his knees, crouched down, and told her how beautiful she was, and said, "Your mama's song, this is Galveston Good." And Galveston was one of the great anti-war songs of all of American song literature. People forget that comes from country. The other reasons why I love country is I had a hard childhood with that mother of mine, but I love country because it actually tackles so many important subjects, and it's such a treasure trove of a Black genius. But my child grew up in country music, and she knows, she's now writing it herself, she knows all the country canon, and she knows she knew, like me, from childhood hour, the banjo was an African instrument. So.
I'm going to ask you later about her take on an American country classic.
Okay.
So how did these families shape your time on Music Row in Nashville?
Well, my father told me, so I graduated from Harvard in '81, wrote my thesis about mothers and daughters in the novels of Jane Austen, but I really did want to write serious novels, and I knew about Anna Gordy and Motown Records, and I thought that I thought the best way to support my serious novel writing would be to come to Nashville and be a country writer and publisher, and I would spotlight unheralded Black genius. So I think this family protected me. As I said, Charley Pride, I knew the day when I got there that he had been at the top of the charts 29 times. I knew Lil Hardin had recorded Struttin' with Some Barbecue, and I've given talks where I have named all the times that song was recorded. It takes something like 7 minutes to name them. She had her last hit after she died on Ringo Starr. So all of this fictive family totally supported me, and I knew Ray Charles still, for having written at that time what I consider to be the most important country album of all time, and Willie Nelson agreed with me, he wasn't in the Hall of Fame. So they inspired me to also advocate for them. They both were my inspiration, that they had done work and been denied their due, but they continued to do the hard work, so that it was about writing the significant songs, putting the significant sounds out. They inspired me that way. And I knew that you have to do, the work was its own reward, and connecting to people, whatever happened, every one of them had to deal with that. Every one of them, except for maybe Mr. Charley Pride.
You remember your time on Music Row fondly, right?
I do. Yes, but it was hard. I mean, one of my favorite songwriters, there's a new Rolling Stone list, I'm not going to say who it is, of 200 best country songs, which is missing several things. One of them, not one actual Black woman country songwriter, although Tracy Chapman is on that list. That song was not written as a country song. There are songs that could have been on that list that aren't there. And the songwriters who said this to me, after meeting me, we shook hands, and he said, "I've been at this too long if I have to compete with nigger girls from Harvard for cuts." And I said, "I am, and you are." And I am glad, despite what the country was, they said, is that my biggest songs are much bigger than his. And what I love about that, it's not about the money made or not made, most of that. It's about the people you connected to. It's about all the people. It's about Aretha Franklin saying, when I got a chance to meet her, I appreciate that my name came first. It's about every Black woman and girl who ever heard that song back in 1994, and heard Aretha Franklin and Patsy Cline and liked Aretha that came first. It's about every white girl and Asian girl and indigenous girl who appreciated Aretha coming first too, and appreciated them coming together and realizing it's about all the women who didn't get to professionally write songs, and it's celebrating that they signed their letters with X's and O's, that you don't have to be a professional writer or published writer to be a significant writer. All of that is in that song. And if some male editors are still not getting it to this moment, that's their issue, because all of these songs have been about the importance of real people in real lives, the difficulty of real people in real lives, the wonder of real people in real lives who, despite having that crazy mother who didn't love me, I love that cherry tree. I love letters. I fell in love with nature and life despite. One of the things I say at the end of the book, you make sane like you make a bed every day. That's something that country music, Black country, all country, will lead you to.
This is a wonderful segue into your songs and the re-recording of your songs, the special album that accompanies this book. Because you wrote an awful lot of songs, and I don't know how you decided which ones would be re-recorded with Ebony Smith and all those marvelous singers she found, some that are established, some that are brand new. Did your songs feel different when you heard them sung by these powerful women?
Absolutely. First, I want to say Ebony Smith is a complete genius. I don't know how many of you have heard raise your hand if you have never heard the Hamilton album. If you've never heard it. Raise your hand if you heard it.
Yeah.
A lot more. Ebony Smith was the engineer on Hamilton. She's a brilliant woman. If you love Atlantic Records, she runs the Atlantic Record studio. She went to Barnard. I mean, she's one of the most well-read people I've ever met in my entire life. So she's this brilliant Black woman who engineered on Hamilton, worked with everyone from Cardi B to Sturgill Simpson. I mean, the woman is just a genius. And she rode to the rescue of my legacy. She's the one who picked most of the artists for this. I had country songs recorded in the 80s, 90s, 0s, 10s, and 20s. No one had ever noticed that. I don't think that anyone had written a national article about it, which is wild that these things, and including, I had a top 10 in the 80s, Girls Ride Horses 2, X's and O's 2 weeks at #1 back in the 90s. These Many Mansions charts, Mo Bandy was a title album cut, breaks, first country song about the homeless. So one of the things I did when I was writing songs, remember I said it's Celtic ballad forms. Celtic ballad forms tell stories, but they also tell history. There's a real connection between country and hip hop, and one of them is that they both are trying to document their times. And ballads from time immemorial have tried to document the times. Country does this. So the things that I tried to document, lynching. There were no songs about lynching in the country canon, and lynching and those kinds of acts of terror were an important part of country life. So I wanted to document that. The Ballad of Sally Ann is about a man who gets lynched between his wedding and reception. The original version of it, which was brilliant on a Grammy-nominated album, John Cowan from the Newgrass Revival sings lead. Mark O'Connor, who Isaac Stern said was the greatest fiddler of the 20th century, plays a fiddle on it and co-wrote the song with me. It objectifies. It's a white person viewing, may not be agreeing with the lynching, but is watching the lynching. Rhiannon Giddens, when she sings it, it's embodied resistance. She is loving him past the grave, past death. It's defiance. It's loving defiance. When she sings with love in his heart and flowers in hand, when she sings in his one good suit, she's also noting that there are Black middle-class people who got lynched. When Ebony Smith put horns on that song, in fact, a lot of the Black people who got lynched exactly because they were having a degree of prosperity, and this was being terrorized out of them and their communities. When Ebony Smith put horns on that song, and I've seen ignorant, I will say the word ignorant, reviewers say, why are there horns on this record? It's to remind people that lynching happened into the 40s, into the 50s, that Emmett Till was lynched after he was drugged down that road in Mississippi. That we want to think that lynching, that original one, that sounds so old-timey, with fiddle and banjo and all of that, it makes you think, oh, lynching something happened in 1890, lynching something happened in 1910. No, lynchings happened in 1935. They happened in the 30s and 40s. They were not as common, but they happened. Emmett Till is a notable example. So those horns remind us that little kids who went from Chicago down to visit family got lynched. That's a hard one. I love Reese Palmer with her crystalline voice. I love Glenn Campbell. I love that Glenn Campbell did Who's Minding the Garden, that he thought it was environmental injustice was one of the big problems of our time, as like the Vietnam War had been a problem of an earlier time. It's even more acute a problem now, Black echo grief, Black breaking with the land because being terrorized from the land. It's hard to feel the same about field to table, farm to table when your family have been hung from the trees. That Reese embodies all of that. And that she's talking about that bay in Alaska and the bees that are disappearing. So all of these songs, and it's not, and I tried to explain this something, it's not that I didn't love Glenn Campbell and Trisha and all the white artists who sang these songs and bravely claimed these songs at the time, because I do. But what I don't like is some of these songs are almost 41 years old. Most of them are 30 plus years old. I never had a Black woman sing one. Never. That I had to wait 41 years to get the first one. It wasn't I wanted Black women only. It was I didn't want Black women, never. And what the country music community had given me was never. And so this is, as I said on one interview today, it's Sankofa, it's good news at long last. These are universal stories. They're not just, the country is all over the country, it's all over the world. Don Williams is listened to a lot in Africa, very popular in Africa. St. Lucia has a lot of country music. Country music is listened to around the world. It can belong to everyone because it takes what's too hard to bear, turns it into beauty and make it bearable. We all need that. But we all need to recognize the Black contributions to it, and Black people need to be able to not just contribute to the banjo, but put their face at the front of it. It's not even asking for something new, it's asking for recognition. Because Lil Hardin and Louis Armstrong were already on Blue Yodel #9, which is considered to this day the most iconic country song of all time. What I'm asking is for them to be recognized.
That whole story is amazing, and there's far more of these songs you can hear. Alice and Ebony put together a playlist. It's called My Black Country, the Songs of Alice Randall. You can find it on Spotify, and it's incredible listening to these songs. I was especially struck by the one, Adia Victoria.
Went for a ride. I love that.
Yes.
And get the album.
Haunted.
I will tell you that album is it's almost completely sold out in Europe. And there's only a small amount of the vinyl that's made. You can get that from your local independent record store or get it from Old Boy directly or get it. But I would say it's really going to be a collector's item because no one anticipated the vinyl would be in that much demand, and we're so excited. But I love supporting these artists, and I did not take any kind of payment for working on this album. I love these artists supporting me. Rhiannon Giddens has a Pulitzer Prize. That they're such extraordinary people, Sunny War. It was a wonderful experience to work with these women. And the reason that I only invited Black women and Ebony to this project was that there are so many Black men who've been in the #1 spot, starting with Charley Pride. I can't even name them all. Jimmie Allen, Breland, Darius Rucker, there's so many. Until this Beyoncé moment, no Black woman has ever been in the #1 spot. That is longer than out of the scope of this, but that's cultural redlining. That is not something that happened naturally. That's not a natural occurrence. So what I wanted to do was put Black women with proven songs that have been proven hits. Every song on this album had been recorded, had found a place in the world despite, and we're trying to put them with these great voices.
So now I'm going to ask you about Caroline's version of the American classic, X's and O's. I was blown away when I heard that because it doesn't resemble the hit that we are all familiar with. And listeners should queue up both versions. As Alice told me earlier, they're speaking to each other, they're answering each other. But who did the arrangements and the reworking of the lyrics for that tune?
Caroline did the reworking of the lyrics. It's really a homage. It's a deconstruction. It's an echo of some of what Ray Charles does with modern sounds in country and western. It deconstructs it and reconstructs it and talks back to it with call and response with Black aesthetics. The actual producer is married to Carrie Crowell, Johnny Cash's granddaughter, one of the daughter's husbands, and that's really sort of exciting. There's a Johnny Cash connection. And with my suggestion, he actually samples DeFord Bailey in that version of it, but Caroline wrote the lyric, and it's just a wonderful mashup of past and present, and I just love it. It feels, it's exciting and it's different and it challenges things.
There's a lot of attitude, there's a lot of confidence running through that song. I hear that and I was feeling a little like not great this afternoon. I was like, nope, I've got the rest of the evening. This is good. This song just gives you a real boost.
I love that she did it. It's wild. It was wild.
Yeah, it's amazing, that one tune. Who are some of the artists that are propelling Black country today that you admire and listen to?
All of the women on this album, I particularly am interested in Rhiannon Giddens, Miko Marks, Reese Palmer, working in country. Allison Russell, I think, is an extraordinary songwriter. Persephone, I write about as a song that I think is a great addition to the country canon. Breland interests me a lot. Tara Kennedy, Raina Roberts, if any of you watch P-Valley, she's sort of like the P-Valley country. Those are some of, I think that nowadays, country is in this moment, almost a wild woman town. As they used to say, it's a young man's town. Now I think of it as a wild woman town. Lil Nas X actually interests me. I think that one of the other Kansas City connections is that when people think, they say, oh, your costume isn't my culture, they don't know that 20 to 30% of all cowboys were Black and brown. And that of the original, and one of the things of Kansas City, what's the Kansas City connection to this? The railroad. Nat Love was an important cowboy, but he wrote his own autobiography. I recommend it to all of you. He talks about, he became a Pullman porter on the railroad coming through Kansas City. But he wasn't the only one. He talks about many of the cowboys, the first Pullman porters, many of them were originally Black cowboys. I talk about Thorpe's original, he was the first person to collect cowboy songs. The first cowboy camp he ever came to, I documented this from a 1940 Atlantic magazine, was a Black cowboy camp. The first cowboy songs he collected, and one of the other songs he collected in that early was a Spanish brown Mexican, in his description, cowboy camp in these Americas. This is a mixture of indigenous Black and white people. So there were Spanish-speaking cowboys in this first generation, some of whom were Black and brown, that are adding to the whole literature of the first cowboy songs. Now, at best, at most, 70% of cowboys were white. There was this 20 to 30% that was Black.
Are there any subjects that you're hoping the songwriters address that maybe you haven't addressed in your Black country songs?
New subjects. I think people are always living new lives. There's a wild song I just heard in country. It's not mine. It's called, I love it. It's a weird, cool song called Percocet and Pawn Shots. I have never had a Percocet problem and never have, but it's a wild song about and failures to appear. It's talking about a life that gets weirdly very messed up, and how do you, and with things like failures to appear. And this is a white guy, and it's very honest about this 7 years of sobriety now. So I think that right now on the other side of the opioid crisis, we need songs like Percocet and Pawn Shops that are helping people out, not just out of addiction, but staying out of addiction and out of, I like Old Quill Medicine Show. Everyone wants to talk about their song, Wagon Wheel. But his most important song is Methamphetamine. It's gonna rock you like a hurricane. Mama's not hungry anymore. So she's waiting for a knock at the trailer door. I like, actually, Brenda Put Your Bra On, I think is a wild song. I mean, I have never lived the specifics of somebody's baby mama coming to the door and finding you in, but I think that these are problems that people are facing. She always gets the good shifts because she's got the good tits. These are problems. How do you face that when you are a shift worker and the woman with better boobs than you is getting the good shifts and you've got a kid to raise too? Country's is addressing what is sexual harassment. What that song says to me is, what does sexual harassment look like today? How is Walmart exploiting people or not? I see that's still the 411 on that. If I were managing people, I'd be listening to country music and feeling and looking into what can I do to make people's lives better, to get them further from Percocets and pawn shops. And there goes the cable and family domestic arguments that end up with the cable going down. Maybe that's something that should be looked at from police departments, that if you're trying to protect people from domestic violence, figure out which homes where the cable keeps going out because people are having such a fight in the place, the cable goes out. There are all kinds. So country is reporting on, as I said to my daughter when she was growing up, one day, I said, if you're doing anything that there are country songs written about, you probably shouldn't be doing it. She had done something. I said, I can think of 3 country songs written about that. You probably shouldn't be doing that. And that's because she grew up with a lot of privilege, that I have lots of sympathy for the people who do the things in the country songs, because those are the best choices they have. That wasn't her.
At the end of My Black Country, you talk about showering mama love on DeFord Bailey. And is that what drove the writing of this book?
That is such a good question that no one else had asked me. Absolutely and utterly yes. And DeFord Bailey, Lil, particularly those 2 people. And I only mentioned this once in the book, but I sort of had a close encounter of death, like 2018, with a bad breast cancer. And I was thinking, that's part of what inspired both finishing Black Bottom Saints and doing this book, that if I only had 3 years to live, if I only had a short period of time, 5 years, what did I want to do with it? And one of it was write a really important book about Motown, that fiction, my last novel. And it was to tell the story of the history of Black people in country music and my own experience with it, but really intimately to give DeFord Bailey and Lil Hardin their due. I really thought these people had contributed so much, those two specifically, to American culture, to world culture, and were utterly unrecognized in their lifetime, almost utterly. Even this sort of clothing thing, Lil also was an amazing couturier. She designed a lot of Louis Armstrong stage suits. She was the only in that generation of jazz musicians. I see a great head of the Jazz Museum in our audience today, that she was one of the only people from that generation that could read and write music. She attended Fisk University for 3 years and was, she would in fact earn a graduate degree, I think out of Chicago eventually. So she also contributed so much by arranging, writing down things, designing outfits, aesthetics, as well as writing songs and performing. And she's so little known, and not just in country, but as her whole position. So I love giving her her flowers. I love locating my own life at this stage. I turned 65 May 4th. That I like to say that with the American Girl, that now the sweetest relationship I have is Mother's Day is one of my favorite days of the year. I love being Caroline's mama. I love having Mama Lil. That part of my crazy mother, who literally probably put me in the hospital once, and totally privileged woman, sent me to the best private schools and had horseback riding lessons and sailing, which I only say to remind you that bad parents come in every socioeconomic class and circumstance. That I love giving Mama Lil, that person following her footsteps, being a songwriter, being a creative person. She said, all I want to do was be a little star twinkling. I hope I followed Lil in their creativity, humility, and she certainly mamaed me. And I love giving all those flowers to my mama and to DeFord. Now, I had a great daddy, but you could always deal with two. And I love I think I'm the first person to document that DeFord Bailey had this, created political jingles and continued performing literally until like the week or so before he died and retelling the end of the DeFord Bailey story.
Well, I'm sure the audience has some questions for you. Folks, if you would please step to the microphones, and that's so that the people that are watching on the live stream can hear your question. And if you're watching, put your questions in the chat, and I will pose them to Alice. So does anyone have a question for Alice? Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I want to welcome you to Missouri, where German hillbilly is one word. Anyway, I had to throw that in there, my own ethnicity, so to speak. But seriously, my question is, I had the honor, as I think I mentioned to you, meeting Charley Pride at the Missouri State Fair, and most of his fans were Caucasian. Not only Caucasian, but Southerners. I'm talking about chewing tobacco, pickup truck, the whole deal. And they thought Charley was great. And so my question is, could you explain Charley Pride's relationship with his fan base, who was mostly Southern and Caucasian? Could you explain how that relationship played out? Thank you.
First of all, great question. It's a complex question. It's going to be worthy of an entire book of someone writing at some point, or chapters. Well, I will just note a few things. That one, you are correct, that Charley Pride had a fan base of, at least particularly initially, of white Southerners, but it was actually white people, working class people all over the country. He was from Sledge, Mississippi. Note that his record label did not put his face on any of the early albums and none of the publicity material. He went, I think I coined this phrase, incognito. Like they said that they did not let him show his race initially. He, quote unquote, came out as black in Detroit City in front of a white audience, but as I was noticing, they did go up north to do that. It was in front of these people working not in Mr. Peabody's coal mines, but in Mr. Ford's auto lines. That's where they, and he did have the shelter of the large black Detroit community. I think it's not a coincidence that he came out as black in Detroit City. I just got a chance to spend some time recently, 2 weeks ago in Dallas with his widow, Rosine Pride. And she actually told his story publicly, so I can I can refer to it here. A complicated story about him having someone very high up in the Klan leadership come to a show and be a great fan. So what's interesting to me, there's so much we can say about it, but is Charley Pride's artistry was so great. His voice, he has actually an extraordinary singing voice across many octaves and notes. His dramatic carving into the song, more layers of story. His physicality in this very athletic way, that people loved him despite all their prejudices. Now, there is a joke from the old days that in the North, they love black people in general and hate them in particular. And in the South, they hate black people in general, but love them in particular. And that's a really complicated thing. So I think that Charley Pride ended some of that because they started off loving him in particular, but there became something that challenged people's ideas about black excellence and significance. And what's even wilder beyond the scope of this, which is wild, which is different than Nat King Cole, some of you talked about, is Charley Pride was accepted as a very virile sex symbol with an only largely white audience that was known, that included white women. And these black, when they were listening to Kiss an Angel Good Morning and Love Her Like the Devil and You Get Back Home, they were very well aware that they were listening to a black man. And they did not know, now he did have a black wife, and there were lots and lots and lots of white female fans of Charley Pride. And they did not get into the same conflicts. I mean, there were almost race riots over Nat King Cole singing songs down south. And so it is very interesting, the role that Charley Pride played in the sexual politics of America. And I think there's a lot to still untangle there.
Side note on Charley Pride, Willie Nelson was one of the people that helped introduce Charley Pride too, and he got criticized.
Absolutely.
My question though is the Chris Stapleton issue. Many black people think he sounds black, and Chris Stapleton's, you know, obviously one of the most popular people right now. You have any opinions on his voice, and does it reach both sides of every genre?
Well, you know, I love that question, but the question is what sounds black, what sounds white? People think that Blue Yodel Number 9 sounds so hillbilly, but then they find out that 2 out of the 3 people playing on it are black people. So Chris Stapleton, the sound of the South, Faulkner's language, William Faulkner's language, is totally influenced by black English. And so the sound of the South, country, the South is an Afro-Celtic culture. I teasingly said a long time ago in a whole nother book at the beginning, you know, the agrarians, those of you who are very literate, you know, that sort of that, and Robert Penn Warren, those, you know, that grouping of writers. And one of them said, like, do they have to have the same hotel we have? Like, can they have their own? And I said in a big speech, well, what hotel are you white people gonna have? Because the Peabody Hotel, the most southern hotel you could imagine, was built by black labor. The people working in it are black people. I said, think of the most white belle that's going to her first debutante dance. Her first facial was some black lady spitting on a handkerchief and wiping her face. What are you gonna have? The South is not Scandinavia. It is not Denmark. It is not Switzerland with a lot of hardworking white people building a world. It is a bunch of white and black people. It's about hardworking black people building a world that white people exploited. That is the story of the South. That is the story of Mississippi. I'm not saying there weren't some hardworking white people too, but North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi, the vast majority of people just objectively living in the state. The vast majority of people living on any plantation. Now there were some individual small farming white people in the South, but the great plantations of the South had a whole bunch of black people living on them and a small number of white people making a whole bunch of wealth. And so it is an Afro-Celtic culture. It is musically, in terms of food, in terms of painting, even architecture. In my first novel, The Wind Done Gone, I tried to identify the plantation houses that we now know were actually designed by black people. Because do you think that in 1780 there was some large number of white architects rumbling around Louisiana when there was no air conditioning and a lot of mosquitoes? No. There were a few people trying to make a lot of money, and there were black people building houses, and some of them started designing things, influenced sometimes by what they had seen in Africa. So.
Thank you for coming. My question is about, did you get to keep your copyright rights? And so many of the Sun Record people used the black people, and they never got, they signed away all their copyright rights. So can you comment about that?
You ask a painful but great question.
I wasn't going to ask you that one.
And, and it's interesting. It just shows you that thing I said about mamas. You can be very, very smart and have a lot of things going. And I have so many things going for me. I was very lucky in so many ways. But actually, my biggest song, I signed away most of the rights to my biggest song. And I take full responsibility for that, though, because ultimately I was an adult. And I believe someone who told me that I should sign some papers without having a lawyer look at them, because it was the exact same contract I had signed before, but it just extended the time period. But it was not remotely the same contract. And we were rushing to go to lunch, and I was thinking, I write in the book, I love that part, I said, but my daughter swam in your pool. I confused a business person with a friend. Never confuse a business person with a friend, even if your child swam in their pool. And so I did do something that was so stupid that I could hardly get a lawyer that wanted to defend me for it. They said, you went to, like, why did you do this? Why did you sign something? And it was because I trusted the person. I think in that I was naive. I took gender positivity. It was a woman. I didn't think, or in real, with the benefit of psychotherapy and reflection, I think the only person who could have got me to do that was a woman. Because I had been abused by my mother, and that I went in some moment, I wanted to please her. I wanted to have the mother who could finally value me, and I could give her something she really wanted. And I walked right back into what I knew, being stolen from. And so that was on me. That's why I take full responsibility. I was probably unconsciously looking for another brilliant, beautiful woman who was gonna hurt me like I'd been hurt, because it had been familiar. But the great thing was, I got a different ending of it. I stopped writing country songs after losing. First of all, that song was so successful, I now am back to making money from it. And second of, it caused me to write a novel, The Wind Done Gone. I did stop and say, never again. And I wrote The Wind Done Gone. I've been very, very successful commercially and artistically as a novelist. I'm not sure I would have gotten to novel writing if I'd gotten all of that money back then. And so, you know, there's, as my daughter says, when someone asked her what did she learn most from me, one was that there's many ways to plan A, that you don't have to go to plan B. That there's many different roads to plan A, what you really want. And what I really wanted, what's wild to me is this ending of my story. That these women, and all of you here, Ebony Smith, Allison Russell, all these women riding to the rescue of my legacy. These were generous. It wasn't because they didn't have time or we were paying them a lot of money, because we didn't. They didn't. That literally at this stage of my life, I was looking for and found generous women of integrity, the Katies, the Allisons, the Allies. My very best friend of my life is a Japanese American woman. Like, the unexpected allies all over this world and that's what the story is now. And those people, I feel sorry for that woman, stole from me. She's no longer, she's gonna make her peace with that, to my knowledge. And I love, like an alcoholic, I take responsibility. I did that. I signed that thing away. I know better than signing a paper without reading it.
We have a question from online,
Yes.
and then we will get to yours.
Yeah.
So someone wanted to ask you to talk about the timing of this book and Beyoncé's album. I'm going to guess that you don't talk to each other very often, but it seems like the reaction to Beyoncé's album is in part because people don't understand this incredibly rich history. And do you think that it's impacting the reception and interest of your book?
I'll teasingly say that there are 4 truths about country. Life is hard, God is real. The road, liquor, and family are significant compensations, and the past is better than the present. Well, that God is real part, I don't believe that God does things like this, but I think God is real, that this Beyoncé album came out at the same time as this book. This is God giving me a very good blessing right there. So, you know, I've been working on this book 41 years, and this Black country moment started in 2006, as far as I'm concerned, and I think I'm one of the first scholars to really talk about that. 2006, 2007, this is when Rihanna and Giddens will be, as part of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, in the Great Debaters. That's the first time most people will see a lot of Black country music, and we gotta give Denzel Washington, who directed that movie, credit for that. 2006, 2007 is also when Reese Palmer will appear on the country charts for the first time, being the first black woman since Linda Martell 40 years before. Linda Martell will be on that Beyoncé album. So to me, since 2006, 2007, that's also the time, 2010, I will publish an article on Linda Martell, Oxford American, the first modern article about her significance. But 2006, I will also I'll be teaching a course called Country, Lyric, and American Culture at Vanderbilt, and teach that course as an Afro-Celtic course. So this is really 18 years ago, 2006 to 2024, that I think this black country moment started coming into bloom then. Because the truth will out, and black people have been in country music since the 17th century. They've been in recorded country music, we know, since 1930. It's actually before that, but let's just use that Lil Hardin example. So I think there was nothing about the timing of, and Beyonce's Daddy's Lesson came out in 2016, I think was the year. And I wrote an article about that in 2016 in American Songwriter magazine. I actually had physical threats made to me in person for defending that as a country song. That's the only time in country music anyone ever physically challenged me. With my When Done Gone book, I had some really significant threats. But I had people call me the N-word, but I'd never had anyone in any way physically threaten me until, and it wasn't frequently, but I think there are at least two people, they were just furious that I was defending Daddy Lessons as a country song and setting it out intellectually. So I think even Beyonce's moment, but mine came from, I've been doing this since 83, and mine came from my illness. You know, that when I thought, and fortunately, I will just for the record say that I had a bad one, but we found it at stage 0. Early detection is important, get a lot of tests. There we are.
So, go right in.
I'm going to back up a little bit to the story in My Black Country, where your former music producer underhandedly got you to sign away some of, if not all of your rights to your song. I'm a songwriter myself, and I was mortified when I read that. I just wondered, how did you get past it emotionally? How did you come through it? And frankly, you've obviously turned out to be incredibly successful in most areas of your life, if not all of them. So what was it that kept you moving?
You know, thank you for that question. I'm going to give you a big answer on that. Tia Miles, I love her book, The Straits of Detroit. You know, the story of America is a lot of the story of theft of land and theft of bodies. Theft is intrinsic to the American experience. Theft of land from indigenous people, theft of bodies and lives of black people. So if you're a black person, you can't get over theft, you can't be black in America. So literally, so what is that old thing? Writing well is the best revenge. And I don't even think in terms of writing as revenge. Oddly enough, I didn't tell this story, it got edited out of the book, but Hal David, who's a great songwriter, he wrote Burt Bacharach, Hal David, all these big songs. Hal David asked me before I moved down here to Nashville, what would I do if someone if someone stole one of my songs? I thought about it, and I said, write another song. He said, you can go now. You go to Nashville. So number one is, you know, people are going to steal from you. And people stole from me, not a lot of time, but even in other ways, like telling them that. And the only thing is that you've got to move towards the light, move towards the love, move towards the creation. I actually never slow myself down on things like revenge. I go for an abundance thing, which doesn't mean that pain isn't real, because I think pain is really real. And I put this in Black Bottom Saints. I know you love Black Bottom Saints. There's a little piece. I said there are 3 responses to hurt. One is common. Hurt hurts, so you're never hurt hurts, but you're going to deny it. A lot of people live with that. They are hurt, they deny hurt. hurt hurts, and so you're gonna hurt other people and never get hurt again. Or hurt hurts, and I'm gonna try to make a world where I don't hurt anybody and I don't get hurt, because hurt is real. So I don't think people should steal from each other, but I definitely feel that you have to work in the abundance and the new creations. And I, thank God, was never writing for the money to begin with, though I have made some real money in music and writing, and supported myself I've supported myself since I was 18 years old, almost purely by writing. I put myself through Harvard. I had that crazy family, so once I was with them 1 year, I never took any more money from them because I did not like them, and so I did not qualify for financial aid in a typical way because of their privilege. So, but I write songs that I think are necessary, that I think will make the world more better, or that I feel that I need, like, to hear. But the songs about the homeless, the songs about the lynching, the songs about small towns being smaller for girls, the songs about the black cowboys. So when you're writing those songs, and I say this, I hope I won't get, that I never worry if people copy my things on the radio. I want them to hear them. At most of my book, I'll say this thing, I hope this is not the one place I'm exploited. I don't know I hope if the books were here. When I spoke in Detroit last week, I said, if you can't afford one of my books and you really need it, one thing, take it from the library. But if you can't do that, tell the bookseller and I will pay for it, because it's more important to me that you read my book than I earn money from my book. With Black Bottom Saints, I put my best chapter up for free.
Yes, you did.
And they would not let me do that with this book. I couldn't get them to do that. But I say the same thing. If you want one of my books and you really can't afford it, let me know, or let the books, and I will, because you don't do this work. It's too painful. And I always tease myself, one of my favorite co-writers who is out on this, so I can say this, Steve Roll, he was a heroin addict when we were writing together. I've never had that kind of problem, but I always, at the end of the day, we write about something hard, and I had no shortcut home. I was like back in this, like, oh God, I'm thinking about this hard thing that we're writing about. Or this, so you don't do this. You do this because you're trying to make life better for other people. You do this because you're trying to take your wisdom and share it, make the pain mean something more than my mother was horrible. Like, I turned it into songs that can make other people's lives. I love all the women who've driven in the carpool to X's and O's with their kids singing along, if it gave them 3 more seconds of peace in the car.
We'll take one more question, and if you can't find any of Alice's books where you're looking for books, go to your library. We can find Alice's books for you.
So again, thank you so much for being here. I wasn't going to ask a question, but the answer you gave about Beyonce's music led me to come up here. Mickey Guyton, her song, Black Like Me, if you live in America and you think it's the land of the free, you should try to be black like me. I just want to hear your thoughts on that song and how it relates to the life that you've had to live and the experiences that you've had in Nashville as a black writer.
Great question. Glad that you put a spotlight on Mickey Guyton. She is in the book. There's I think, a really cool scene of her backstage with her father praying. I think one of the things that's interesting about Mickey Guyton is she got much more successful when she started singing from her black identity, frankly. I also think it's interesting, I shout out, not that this is important, my daughter is married to someone who's white from Kansas, but Mickey Guyton is one of the only, if not the only major, there's only two, Tira Kennedy. She's married to a black man with a black child, which I think is very interesting, not necessary, but interesting. Only Charley Pride has had a very positive experience that really was financially successful and recognized in country music. Because even Ray Charles wasn't recognized for what he did. He only went into the Country Music Hall of Fame in like the last 3 or 4 years. I've had kids that work on it. It's interesting, Mickey Guyton I had in my class when I introduced a course in 2015 at Vanderbilt called Black Country, so that was 9 years ago. I had Mickey Guyton come to class. You can see the pictures online, yeah. And I write about this situation. I hope you can imagine, I think one of the two things I'm most proud of is I think I'm a really good mama, and I think I'm a really good teacher. I teach my heart out. I love my kids, my students. But I have my classes, they do really well. I let them go off the reservation, but they do whatever they are, and I take back that phrase, because that's a very strange phrase. But what I say about the defiance, go off the reservation, not stay on the reservation. So I do not police them is what I mean by that. So that is not in favor. It's like, but one day Mickey's there, we're in a small seminar room, and this kid is on the phone. This is 2015 when people weren't even always on their phone. I'm thinking, I'm giving her the look. I'm doing like, Mickey is trying to talk. She is on her phone. I get there, I put, that church thing, I put my hand on her shoulder. Oh. Now, it's not my child, so I did not squeeze the shoulder like I might have squeezed my child's shoulder, but I did. And she turns the phone to me. Her sister is on the phone. It still makes me cry. Her sister went to this, I think, majority white school, was one of the few black kids in it, and Mickey Guyton was the world to her, including Mickey Guyton being in these all-white videos, which a lot of black people were saying, why is Mickey Guyton the only black person in her videos? This kid had an interpretation of it, and this is why she's on the phone, because they're texting back, there's a whole conversation. To her, this was Mickey Guyton, this time, this is 2015, this is a generation of kids who some of them were in all-white spaces. They were still being expected to go into all-white space, majority white environments and perform. And they felt Mickey Guyton was making it safer for them. This girl, everything about Mickey Guyton. So she was identifying specifically with Mickey Guyton's ability to engage herself and have agency surrounded by whiteness. And those are the things I love when you're open to your students to let them teach you as much as you try to teach them. They will surprise you. And it was a whole new interpretation that I share, and I acknowledge my student in there, that maybe that's what Mickey Guyton was doing when she is creating these videos. Because she was one of these people who, as she said in the class, she went to all-black church on Sunday, but she went to all-white school Monday through Friday. She was one of the, and I think of my own little child, in a white private school, that in her kindergarten class, I went to a black private school in Detroit City. My child went to, quote unquote, the best school in Nashville, but she was the only black girl in her kindergarten class. There was one black boy. She, for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, was the only black child in advanced math for 4 years in middle school. She actually was exposed to a lot more weird racism than I was, even though there was less in the world, because she had to spend so much time as the unexpected black body in white spaces. Even if most of the people were progressive, there were these few always. Some of them would come and be stabbing this little child in the back. So Mickey Guyton, I think, is actually more profound than a lot of people realize. And I think she did go through a lot. I think like a lot of those kids, like my child didn't believe, despite all that, until she went to teach in a dirt road in the Delta, literally, in Moorhead, Mississippi. She didn't realize everything I told her about the world scene was real, because she did have a lot of kumbaya with the rest of what she was doing with. I think now, unfortunately, it's become too real for all of us with this Beyoncé moment to realize how much a black and white audience was looking for this. Makes us realize even more acutely how much interference was going on to make sure it hadn't happened yet. Because when you look at a Rhiannon Giddens in 2006, who is superficially beautiful by any superficial majority standards in America, superficially an amazing musician. She was a formerly trained opera singer, writes incredibly well, is a virtuoso musician. She's on the Beyoncé album playing her banjo. She plays multiple instruments. There almost has to be, I call it cultural redlining, and I will not try to imagine here on something so insignificant. Obstacles, visible and invisible, have to be in place to keep Rhiannon out of that top space. Obstacles had to be in place to keep Reese Palmer at the height when she, in 2006 and 7. It's harder for Reese trying to do this, and she may still have a chance at 2024 because there's a lot of ageism against all artists in country that are female. And it has always been harder for female artists. It was hard for Dolly, for these new ones. It is hard. Small towns are smaller for girls, but they're even smaller for Black girls. So I think that it is, Mickey Guyton is very significant. What is going to be really significant is what happens this year. Randall Roberts, Tiara Kennedy, Yola, Rhiannon, Reese, Allison Russell. What happens with these new artists? Which of them? We saw Shabuzi, if that's how you pronounce it, has already come to another space, but that's another Black man. It shows you the interesting Black person to now, that's not Beyoncé, to take a space, is what we've seen before. Let's hope that we do see, and I think we will, because we've proven in the last part of this conversation, and it ends with you, the real heroes of this story are you, the audience. I am so proud of Kansas City. You all come, you don't know me, you're here. You've got this amazing downtown library. You're a diverse group of people. This is the best of America. And this is you. This is thinking and feeling and embodied learning. You are not just there virtually. You're here sharing, we're sharing breath. We've got to make that comfortable. That has to be what we see in our country audiences too. Because quiet as it's kept, even the Black Opry, even Rhiannon Giddens shows, if you see them, it's almost all white audiences still. How do we change that? One of the things that I'm really proud of for myself is that my book talks, I've had now 8 books, I think. I get diverse audiences. I have a large Black fan base, I have a white fan base, I have an Asian fan base, I have a diverse fan base. I am really interested, but part of it is the country things. Even when it's Rhiannon singing, a lot of Black people don't feel invited into the room, not by the audience, but by the larger cult. Excuse me, not by the artist. They know Rhiannon wants them there. But they're not sure about the person gonna be sitting next to them. They're not sure about that. And so I think that's one of the things I love about the Black Opry. We've got to address, how do we make, maybe that's a library should have some concerts. Libraries have done such a good job of making diverse groups of people feel welcome. We've got to get those sponsorships that way, or bring in people such as Terry McMillan's audience and help me with Razor Blade Tears.
Oh, S.A.
Cosby. I think that's embodied country music and fiction.
Yes.
I think his audience should, I mean, maybe it's putting some writers along with the artist to invite people in. I can't tell you yet, but look to in the next month or 6 weeks, you will see a somewhat major country star has asked me to open for them in a major venue, but it's gonna be literature. I'm sure that with some singing and this thing, I'm sure it's part of inviting it and making it more comfortable for a broader audience to come. So we've got to see, how do we make the country concert audience look like this beautiful audience? That's why I wanted to take a picture of you. You are the heroes, and I really encourage you. You are modern Medicis, I'm against them, because for the $28, and I encourage you that, and as I said, this is not about, it's important to poor Black, white, Asian, indigenous kids to know they are included in the country music story. Because in America, country music and American identity have been like this. And we have contributed so much to this. And we need this book, and if I have any success with it, I am really going to be giving back and giving forward with anything I make from this book. I want to see this book be successful for the same reason I wanted X's and O's to be at the #1 spot in the charts. Because that's the way you get to the poorest people. The poorest people, the people who have the least access to culture, only get the thing if it's way out there everywhere and being discussed. And so I need you, the modern Medicis, to buy this $28 book. I'm serious. And we need to push it forward. I need you to mention it to companies because it needs that. The first family is something all America will be improved by knowing. And that is just a reality. And even right now, as far as I know, in most of my books, I have literally spent more money putting those books back out in the world than I made on the book, except for my very first book. That would be the only one that I didn't do that on. But these are necessary stories, and I need the audience. You guys have to catch it fire. And it is a USA Today bestseller, but we need to keep pushing it. We need to get that New York Times thing because there's still gatekeepers who are prejudiced against everyday people, gatekeepers who are not interested in, they don't even understand what's really going on with X's and O's, that it's basically saying that people who are writing letters are just as important as people who professionally write songs. They're people who don't know. Like I talk about in the book, one other thing, is that when I went to Georgetown Day School, and I love my school, and Ketanji Brown was, I think, head of the board for a while, before she got in the Supreme Court. But in that school, everyone wore blue jeans, but everybody's daddy was a lawyer or doctor or psychiatrist or senator or congresspeople. And they didn't realize it was ironic that they all wanted to look like poverty-stricken sharecroppers and nobody worked for a union. And so many of the people who are in control of the music press to this day are people who don't know one thing about trying to say survive. And don't know enough working class people, don't know enough people who are living with trauma. And it becomes an echo chamber of people, and that's what I consider the New Yorker magazine thing, that is people who are writing to people who are reading. And I still hope the best thing about me, when I write, I work 7 days a week. As I said, I've been supporting myself since I was 18, 19 years old, and support a lot of. And I still think and hope the best thing about me is the way I live, not the way I write. And that the people I cook for and clean for and babysit for and dog sit for, it is because to me that's why I really write, because I have not made myself above or below or different from everyday living. I don't write in relation to other art, though I read books every single day. Every single day. I love books. I said my two addictions are books and coffee. I read in multiple languages, in many centuries. I started off novels, Mothers and Daughters and Novels of Jane Austen. I came to country music through American metaphysical poetry, Edward Taylor. I love literature, but more than that, I love cooking for people, feeding them, dancing in the kitchen, and having them drag me to the breast cancer person and having me drag them to the breast cancer people. That's the real thing. That's why I had to stop and mention to you, early detection saves lives. These are real lives of real people. If I could put, that's the thing I want to write a country song about next. Yes. But you know what? I wouldn't be the first one. You know why I haven't done that? There's a song called Tough. And I never liked that song until I had breast cancer. And it was written by a guy someone said, who describes himself as being, one of them at least, as a real redneck. And he said, I thought I was tough. And then he talks about his wife would put that wig in and raising her hand in the church, and that how when they get this bad diagnosis, and that's a song about a woman. There actually are some great country hits about having cancer. That's why I haven't written one. I didn't need to write one, but those songs helped me get through.